In the early hours of March 12, 2025, a horrific high-speed crash in Cleveland, Ohio, took the lives of 4 teenagers. The car they were riding in had been reported stolen, and the impact of the crash was so violent that it left the community reeling. The tragedy sparked a wave of grief and countless unanswered questions. How did these young lives end so suddenly, and why were they in that car to begin with? Corey Williams was 19, on the cusp of adulthood. He was figuring out his future with dreams of doing something meaningful with his life. His best friend, Eddie DeAndre Bonner, was 18, funny, loyal, and full of energy. He and Corey had been inseparable since childhood. Tamara Davis and Khalees McGee were both just 14, barely teenagers. Tamara was focused and bright, known for her talent in art. Khalees was more outgoing, always laughing and full of life. The two girls were close friends, often seen walking home from school together. 4 young lives, full of promise and potential, gone in an instant. The crash wasn't just a tragic accident, it left a hole in the hearts of their families and the entire community. But beneath the grief and devastation was a lingering sense that something more was at play. What happened that night? What led these 4 young people to that car, and could this terrible outcome have been prevented? Corey Williams was known for his quiet confidence and strong sense of purpose. At 19, he had recently graduated from high school and was trying to figure out his next steps in life. Friends described him as ambitious and hardworking, with a natural ability to make people feel at ease. He had dreams of starting a business one day, something that would help lift up his community. His family remembers him as dependable, always willing to help out when someone needed him. Corey's calm nature and steady presence made him a role model for many younger kids in the neighborhood. Eddie Bonner, 18, was Corey's closest friend. They had known each other since they were kids, growing up on the same block and sharing countless memories. Eddie was the outgoing one, always quick with a joke and known for his infectious laugh. He loved sports and had been a standout player on his high school's basketball team. Friends often said Eddie had a way of making people feel included, no matter who they were. He and Corey were often seen together, walking through the neighborhood or playing ball at the park. Their friendship was more like family. Tamara Davis, just 14 years old, was in middle school and had her whole life ahead of her. Teachers described her as bright and cheerful, with a quick mind and a natural curiosity about the world. She was the kind of student who left a lasting impression, polite, eager to learn, and kind to everyone. Tamara had a close bond with Khalees McGee, who was also 14. The two girls were inseparable, often finishing each other's sentences and making plans for the future. Khalees was passionate about music and dancing. She had dreams of becoming a professional dancer one day and would often choreograph routines with Tamara. Khalees had a vibrant personality, bringing energy and light to any room she entered. Her teachers described her as creative and full of life. Friends recall how protective Khalees was of Tamara. The two girls stuck together no matter what. Despite the age gap, Corey and Eddie had taken Tamara and Khalees under their wing. They had a shared connection through family and the tight-knit neighborhood where they all grew up. Corey and Eddie acted like older brothers to the girls, looking out for them, giving advice, and making sure they stayed out of trouble. It wasn't uncommon to see the 4 of them together, laughing and talking as they walked down the street or gathered at a local basketball court. In the days leading up to the crash, life seemed normal for the teens. Corey was helping his younger brother with schoolwork, Eddie was talking about trying out for a local basketball league, and Tamara and Khalees were excited about an upcoming school event. Nothing about their behavior suggested that something was wrong. That's what makes the tragedy so hard to process for those who knew them, how quickly life can change, how fragile everything can be. The families were left with a void that can't be filled. Corey's mother spoke about how he had been looking into college programs just days before the crash. Eddie's father described the last time he saw his son, smiling and talking about basketball. Tamara's teachers left flowers at her desk, and Khalees' friends held a small memorial, playing the music she used to love. The grief spread through the neighborhood like a wave, touching everyone who had known the teens. The question that haunts everyone is why? Why did they end up in that car? Why were they speeding through the streets that night? And most painfully, could any of it have been prevented? When the police arrived at the scene of the crash, the wreckage told a devastating story. The car was mangled beyond recognition, debris scattered across the road. Emergency responders worked quickly, but it was clear that nothing could be done to save the 4 teens. The quiet of the early morning was shattered by the flashing lights of patrol cars and the low hum of emergency vehicles. The official police report confirmed that the car the teens were in had been reported stolen just hours before the crash. Investigators traced the car's ownership to a local resident who had reported it missing the previous evening. The circumstances of how the teens gained access to the car were still unclear. What was known was that the vehicle was traveling at a dangerously high speed when it veered off the road and crashed. Police were quick to clarify that there had been no pursuit involved. Contrary to some initial speculation, no police cars had been following the vehicle at the time of the crash. Surveillance footage from nearby traffic cameras showed the car speeding down the street moments before the impact. But there were no signs of flashing lights or sirens behind them. One of the key questions investigators faced was why the driver was going so fast. Toxicology reports were ordered to determine whether alcohol or drugs were involved. The driver's identity was withheld at first, pending the investigation. The police faced pressure from the public to release more details, but they held back, saying they needed to complete the full analysis before drawing conclusions. The toxicology results were expected to take several weeks, leaving many in the community speculating about what had happened in those final moments before the crash. The crash site quickly became a focal point for the neighborhood. Mourners left flowers, candles, and handwritten notes along the roadside. Photos of the four teens were placed side by side on the pavement, surrounded by flickering candlelight. The grief was raw and immediate. Classmates, teachers, and neighbors gathered in small groups, speaking in low tones about the tragedy. Questions about the crash began circulating almost immediately. How did they get the car? Why were they driving at such a dangerous speed? Who was behind the wheel? The fact that no police were involved in a chase only deepened the mystery. If they weren't being pursued, why were they driving like they were running from something? In the days that followed, the police held a press conference to address the growing public concern. The lead investigator confirmed that the crash was still under investigation and that they were working with the families to piece together the events leading up to that night. They asked for privacy for the families and patience from the public. But the lack of clear answers left the community restless. For the families of the victims, the wait for answers was unbearable. Corey's mother expressed frustration with the pace of the investigation. Eddie's father questioned why more information wasn't being shared. Tamara and Khalil's families struggled to make sense of how their daughters ended up in that situation. The grief mixed with confusion and anger as the days passed without resolution. The school held a memorial service for Tamara and Khalil, where classmates shared memories and teachers spoke about the impact the girls had made. Corey and Eddie's friends organized a candlelight vigil where they gathered at the local basketball court to remember their lost friends. The weight of the loss settled heavily over the neighborhood, a quiet emptiness that no one knew how to fill. The unanswered questions remained at the center of everything. Who was driving? What caused them to lose control? And most pressing of all, could anything have been done to prevent it? In the wake of the crash, one question echoed louder than the rest: why were they in a stolen car? It was a detail that immediately complicated the tragedy, shifting the narrative from an accident to something more difficult to explain. How did four teenagers, two of them still in middle school, end up inside a vehicle that didn't belong to them? Corey and Eddie were known in the neighborhood. They weren't troublemakers. They had friends, families, and bright futures ahead of them. Tamara and Khalil were even younger, barely teenagers, described by their teachers and classmates as kind and full of life. The idea that they would knowingly get into a stolen car raised questions that no one could easily answer. Investigators confirmed that the car had been reported stolen hours before the crash, but the timeline was hazy. Who stole it and when remained unclear. There were whispers among neighbors and classmates about how the teens got the car. Some believed that Corey or Eddie had taken it as a joyride, that they had made a reckless decision in the heat of the moment. Others suggested that someone had loaned them the car without telling them it was stolen. Then there was the question of the younger girls. Did Tamara and Khalil know the car was stolen when they got in? Some classmates said they had heard the girls talking about going for a ride that night. Others said the girls were excited to spend time with Corey and Eddie, who had become like older brothers to them. But none of those casual conversations hinted at the dangerous situation that was about to unfold. Heather Davis, Tamara's mother, spoke out publicly a week after the crash. Fighting back tears, she said she couldn't believe that her daughter would knowingly get into a stolen car. She trusted them, Heather said. They were like family. Khalil's parents echoed that sentiment. They believed their daughter had no idea the car was stolen, that she was just along for the ride. But some in the community weren't as sympathetic. Rumors began to circulate that Corey and Eddie had been involved in trouble before, that they might have been caught up in something dangerous. Friends of the boys denied those claims, saying they were being unfairly blamed for a tragic accident. Others wondered if the teens had been trying to escape from someone, that maybe they weren't speeding for fun, but out of fear. Police remained tight-lipped about the details. They confirmed that the car had been stolen, but they wouldn't release information about how the teens came into possession of it. Toxicology reports were still pending and investigators were working to reconstruct the events leading up to the crash. But the silence only fueled more speculation. Why were they driving so fast if no one was chasing them? Who was behind the wheel? And how did the car end up in their hands in the first place? The lack of answers left the families in emotional limbo, torn between grief and confusion. Classmates of the younger girls took to social media, expressing disbelief and sadness. Tamara and Khalees had been bright spots in their school, involved in sports and music, known for their infectious energy. Their friends struggled to understand how a normal night could have ended so tragically. Meanwhile, Corey and Eddie's friends pushed back against the growing narrative that they were to blame. They spoke out about the boys' character, how they had always looked out for others and had never been involved in serious trouble. They weren't bad kids, one friend said. They made a mistake, but they didn't deserve this. As the days passed, the pressure on the police to release more information grew. Reporters pressed for updates, but investigators remained careful with their words. The community wanted answers, but the truth, it seemed, wasn't ready to come out. In the days and weeks following the crash, the weight of the tragedy settled over the community like a heavy fog. For young lives, Corey, Eddie, Tamara, and Khalees, gone in an instant. Their faces stared back from memorial posters and candlelit vigils, a reminder of the fragility of life and the unforgiving nature of a single moment's decision. For the families left behind, the pain was immeasurable. Corey's mother spoke through tears at his memorial service, saying she had lost more than a son. She had lost her reason to wake up in the morning. Eddie's father described the quiet emptiness left behind, the sound of the front door never opening again, the chair at the dinner table forever empty. Tamara and Khalees' families struggled to comprehend how two girls so young, so full of life and promise, could be gone. The questions surrounding the crash lingered like an open wound. How did four teenagers end up in a stolen car? Why were they speeding that night? Could something have been done to prevent it? The toxicology reports, the police statements, the forensic analysis, none of it could bring them back. And none of it could truly explain why it happened. But beneath the unanswered questions, a deeper truth emerged, one that cut across age, race, and social status. The vulnerability of youth. The temptation of risky decisions. The pressure to fit in, to prove something, to feel alive. These were not bad kids. They were kids navigating a world that often expects too much of them and protects them too little. In the aftermath of the crash, local schools began hosting conversations about peer pressure, decision-making, and the consequences of risky behavior. Counselors were brought in to help classmates process their grief. Teachers and parents struggled to find the right words to explain to children why their friends weren't coming back. At the crash site, flowers and photos continued to pile up. Handwritten notes, stuffed animals, and flickering candles created a quiet tribute to the lives lost. Friends gathered there in the evenings, sitting together in silence, trying to make sense of what didn't make sense. In the end, the story of Corey, Eddie, Tamara, and Khalees wasn't defined by the mistake that led to their deaths. It was defined by the lives they lived, the smiles they shared, the love they gave, the moments of joy they left behind for those who knew them. Their families would carry that with them, the heartbreak, yes, but also the memory of who they were. And as the community searched for healing, one thing became clear: this wasn't just a story about loss. It was a story about the precious, fleeting nature of life and the urgent need to protect the young lives that still have so much left to live. Thank you for watching. The loss of Corey, Eddie, Tamara, and Khalees is a heartbreaking reminder of how fragile life can be and how important it is to protect and guide our youth. Their families and friends now face the difficult road of healing, carrying the memory of their loved ones while searching for answers that may never fully come. If you found this story meaningful, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment to share your thoughts, and subscribing to the channel for more updates and in-depth stories. Your engagement helps keep these stories alive and brings attention to the issues that matter most. Thank you for being part of this conversation. Their story deserves to be remembered.